So on this walk today, we're going to be walking around Wavertree, looking at some of the finer details that you get in the buildings and the little interesting objects that you might walk past every day without actually noticing. So we're going to have a look at them, talk a bit about the history of them, why they're there, and get some nice images, photos, audio recordings of these little bits and pieces. The hidden history around Wavertree. This is one of those typical buildings that you probably walk past a lot of times but don't really take much attention of. You've got to remember that Wavertree, where we are now, was not part of Liverpool until the 1890s. It was actually a separate township, and if you read any of the old books or papers about it, it will actually say Wavertree near Liverpool. And for that reason, the area basically became a little bit more residential when the people who made their money in Liverpool, the ship owners and the merchants, decided to build their houses around here. And what you can see here is one of those sort of houses. It probably dates from about the 1850s, 1860s. It's in the Italianate sort of style, which is very fashionable at the time. You can tell that because it's got quite wide eaves. You know, they come over quite a way. It looks like a sort of villa that you might get in Italy. That's where they took the inspiration from. But what I think is the most interesting thing about it is when you look at the gateposts in front of the front door. Does anyone notice what they are? The cannons. Yeah, the old cannons. Now that's a bit weird, isn't it? Why is that there? Well, we don't know exactly why they're there or why the owner of the house put them there, other than they make really handy bollards, so if you're driving your carriage in and out, you're unlikely to knock your stonework. But we can sort of guess they probably came there from about the 1870s or something like that. And we know that because that was the time when the Royal Navy started changing over from having what they called the muzzle loading guns, which are the old cannons where you put the gunpowder and the ball and the padding into the front of the gun, and you've seen it on films, you know, where they ram it down with a big stick. They changed from using them into what they call breech loading guns, which is the ones where you open the back of it and you put everything in from behind. You load the shell and the cannonball from behind. And basically, when they upgraded all the ships in the Navy, they couldn't change the actual guns. They had to take them out and replace them entirely. So they basically ended up with a load of iron cannons that they had to get rid of somehow. Many of them were sold to scrap merchants who probably melted them down, but many of them as well were just sold on the open market, and many people bought them to use as ornamental bollards, and a lot of them were used in docks as sort of, you know, to tie mooring ropes around as cleats on dock sides. If you go down, there's lots of them in London, lots of them in Plymouth and Portsmouth, and of course because Liverpool was a port and we had lots of ships coming here, there was probably a lot more of them in the past as well. But these are some of the only surviving ones we've got in Wavertree. So yes, there are two cannons in Wavertree, probably from an old Royal Navy ship. We don't know which ship, we don't know where they came from, but one of the little curious things that you might not notice when you walk past every single day. Don't know if anyone wants to get some photos. Yeah. Is that a cannonball on top of it? Yeah, we think they've put cannonballs in the very top of them just to block them off. Probably just to stop litter and stuff getting trapped in the top of it. You know what it's like. Good pub quiz question, that. Where are the cannons in Wavertree?
Not in the church.
Yeah, not in the church. Yeah, good point.
Okay folks, if you want to look over here, this is probably the oldest object in Wavertree. Well, apart from the old stonework and things, it's the oldest object to come to Wavertree because it's part of what we term a glacial erratic. So that travelled, and it should actually tell you where it came from, all the way down from, where does it say? Cumberland. Any idea where Cumberland is? Yeah, Lake District. Well guys, where we are now standing, would you believe this used to be a nursery, an orchard, but what have we got here now? We've got the library, and then next to it was the old bathhouse, or where the one-stop shop was located. They were built, and this shows you how Liverpool sort of grows, they're actually designed by a chap called Thomas Gemeldine, and he at the time was the sort of city surveyor, the key architect for Liverpool. And he built libraries, he built bathhouses, and also when we passed the education place, he was responsible for designing them as well. So this is Liverpool was developing. Now we are walking along Picton Road. Now Picton Road is named after James Picton. Anyone heard of Picton Clock? Yep. That was dedicated to his wife Sarah Pooley, but he was an architect, he was a councillor, so he was the councillor for the Lime Street area in Liverpool, but he was also chairman for 40 years of the libraries and leisure committees of Liverpool. So in his honour they named the Picton Reading Rooms, and it was designed by Mr. Skemeldine, which is absolutely great. So you can see the links developing, can't you? Picton, of course, came and lived out in Wavertree with his wife for how many years was it? They were married for about 50 years. And he was a Wavertree resident, and he was always very keen on what he could do for Wavertree people. But more about the clock later on, I think. So, everyone taking the picture on that one? So, shall we swap back over?
Yeah, just to say one added thing about this this big boulder in front of the library. Is that what it's a glacial erratic basically means that when the glaciers covered most of England, we're talking at the time of the last ice age, millions of years ago, they carried lots of stones that we don't get in this part of the world with them, you know, the massive heavy blocks of ice running through the country. In fact, it was a glacier that basically made the River Mersey Valley, cut out the land that forms the sort of bowl that the River Mersey is in. So you've got the high land of sort of Woolton Hill to Edge Hill on the Liverpool side, and you've got sort of Bidston Hill on the Wirral side. That bowl in the middle was cut out by a huge glacier, probably the very same glacier that dropped this stone here. It's made of a very hard rock, and if you ever look around any of the walls in Liverpool, you'll see that most of the stone in Liverpool, most of the rock that Liverpool's built on, is very soft sandstone. We don't get a lot of this hard sort of shiny rock around here. So it is that's why it's called a glacial erratic, because it was dropped here millions of years ago. I do know that when you may know that George Harrison lived in Wavertree, and George Harrison actually remembers as a kid climbing on this rock. It mustn't have had railings about it in those days, because he remembers saying in some of his recollections that he used to climb on the rock, and the kids in the area used to think it was a piece of meteorite that had fallen from outer space. Now, it's a little bit more earthbound than that, but you know what kids' imaginations are like. Shall we continue on then? I'll stand in the doorway here so you can stand back and get photos. Hopefully you can hear me. But I'll just tell you a little bit about this building. So as Martin said, one of the leading architects of Liverpool in the late 19th and the early 20th century was a man called Thomas Shelmerdine. He built the library, he built the swimming baths next door, but he also built this building, and this was the old Wavertree Technical Institute. And like I said before, Wavertree, you've got to remember, was a separate town from Liverpool. So in the same way that Liverpool would have had its schools and would have had its institutes and its sort of public buildings, so Wavertree at that time started to build its own sort of social infrastructure. And this is one of them. So this is where young lads from Wavertree, and it was primarily boys in those days who'd get the education, sadly, this is where they'd go to learn technical and vocational sort of trades, such as engineering or drawing, planning and those sorts of things. Stuff that you wouldn't learn in a grammar school, but you'd learn a bit more technical and vocational. And these technical institutions basically became what we call polytechnics later on. Even something like John Moores University, which started as a polytechnic, originally started as a mechanical institution for Liverpool. So you can see it's quite for a small town like Wavertree, it's quite a grand and impressive building. It's got this fantastic granite doorway with the yellow sandstone on top and the red brick, and you can definitely see by the architecture that it was designed by the same person who did the library and did the old swimming baths next door to it. In fact, if you travel around Liverpool and you see any building that looks a little bit like this, particularly these columns, which are a mixture of rounded columns and square blocks, that's a very, very good indicator that it was Thomas Shelmerdine who designed it, because that was his sort of signature, if you like, for all his buildings.
The other location that Thomas Skemeldine was involved with, sorry I like to lean, my apologies, was the gardens at the back of St George's Hall. So he laid those memorial gardens out, and also entrances into, sorry I'll take this off for a sec, just make sure you guys can hear me properly. Also the entrances into Sefton Park and some of the other public parks, Everton Library as well. Isn't that cool? Oh, great idea putting a place like this out. If we do a quick turn around, they're doing up a lovely Georgian cottage. That's grade 2. By the way, Wavertree has got 68 grade 2 and above listed, or 2-star listed buildings. That's not bad, is it? And a lot of them are on the high street here. So yeah, so that's lovely. I'm delighted that's being done up. I had friends of mine who wanted to buy that ages ago. It's worth looking at some of the old maps. We'll post some of the old maps for you guys to have a look at how Wavertree's changed and developed. You can imagine developing from a rural into much more of an urban area. So that was the beginning of the 20th century, was it became more of an urban area. So Richard, where are we off to next, mate?
Okay, if you'd like to follow me, we're going to head up and I think our next stop is going to be up towards the Rose Garden. So follow me up there. Probably worth just mentioning a funny little fact here. Not particularly linked with Wavertree, but definitely linked with Liverpool, is the old red telephone box, technically known as the K6 telephone box. It was designed by a very famous early 20th century architect called Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. And he was one of the greatest architects of the 20th century, but he was also the same architect who designed Liverpool Cathedral, the big old Anglican cathedral, basically. And I actually reckon that if you look at the sort of lines on the old phone box and the sort of shape of it, now imagine the middle tower of the Anglican cathedral. I think they've got very similar proportions. So I think, again, he was one of these architects who had his sort of style and sort of stuck with it. So yeah, Giles Gilbert Scott, great architect, designed the old red telephone box, but also designed Liverpool Anglican Cathedral. And if you go inside the Anglican Cathedral, you'll actually see they've got a red telephone box in there. So that's his smallest building he designed inside the biggest building that he designed, which not many architects can say that, can they?
Richard, can I come in on that one? And the interesting part is you see the tower at the Anglican Cathedral. That was a redesign, but that was designed, the tallness of it was designed way before he designed the K6. So he's gone from massive down to dead small. And by the way, when he got the job of being the architect, it was his first proper commission. But we won't talk about the politics of the cathedral, will we?
No. Okay, we'll continue up here. So here we are, and as you can see, we're standing exactly opposite the Wavertree Rose Garden, which I'm sure many of you have admired on the way past here. You know,
We work on it.
and you work on it and you clean it up and look after it, and you know, it's been lovingly made by the community in Wavertree and looked after by the community for many years.
The Wavertree Society.
And the Wavertree Society originally started. It was there was a row of old terraced houses here at one time, just sort of very small, rundown cottages, and they basically were in such a state that they got cleared away, and it was left as wasteland. It was just brownfield site. There was nothing going on there, and so it was the Wavertree Society. One of their earliest things was to try and do something with it, and so they planted it out as a community rose garden, and that's what it is now. The building just slightly to the left of the rose garden, when you look at it, is known as Rose Cottage. And it's probably one of the early survivors of when Wavertree was still a village. And you might notice that Wavertree has this tendency that we have some buildings that are right on the front of the road and others are sort of set back. Well, at one time they all would have been set back because they would have all had gardens in front of them. Much the same way when you walk through any other village, the houses are usually set back from the road with a lovely garden. Wavertree was the same. This is one of the last survivors of it. It's a lovely old building, still got original slate roof, the original sandstone wall at the front. It's a very, very rare and beautiful survivor. And in fact, this area where we're standing now, if you look up and down behind you on either side, you can see some of the houses that were still are residential and are the remainders of Wavertree as it was in the late 17 and early 1800s.
And they're all Grade 2 listed.
Yes, they're all listed buildings as well, which means they're protected by law, so you can't change them or do much to them.
Yes, it was Rose Cottage.
Yeah, that's the important American, is it? It's the Americans want to see that building.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah, so Rose Cottage and the cottages like it. In the, I think it was the 1820s and 1830s, they were the home to a family called the Hemmans family, who were merchants. They were, I think the father of the family was a merchant and was the Venetian ambassador to Liverpool at one point. But they were made most famous by their daughter, who was a lady called Felicia Hemmans, who was a poet. She wrote a couple of quite famous poems in their day. We don't remember them too much now in this country. Perhaps the only one we remember is, you might remember the song from, or the lines when you were a kid. The boy stood on the burning deck when all but he had fled. It was a poem called Casabianca, about a very brave young naval officer who stood on the deck and basically died in the middle of a battle because he refused to leave his post, you know, which is the sort of heroic story behind the poem. She also wrote a poem called The Thanksgiving Feast, which is read every year in America at Thanksgiving. It's one of those famous poems, not in this country, but over there. So they know that when Americans come on the Magical Mystery Tour or on the coach tours through Wavertree, often it's pointed out by the guides, and the lady who wrote that famous poem that you say every year at your Thanksgiving meal lived in this house in Wavertree for a time. So yeah, little transatlantic fact you might not have known there.
Garden. I thought I would stop here. Very familiar building. How many of you guys are from the old police station? Excellent. Do you want to know a bit about its history? Right, this is a third incarnation of the sort of the Lockup. This is when Liverpool had its own proper constabulary. Now we'll show you the Lockup. We're going to take you into the Lockup, the original Lockup later on, and we'll talk about that. But this became the sort of police and fire location. So you imagine at the back the fire engines coming out for the area, the police. But I can tell you a really fantastic, funny little story. And what I want you guys to do is actually go and see if you can find it, okay? Because there's a story, early 20th century story this happened. There was a police officer on patrol outside, I'm being politically correct, a bobby, okay? A bobby out on patrol at Holy Trinity Church and we're going to have a look at that afterwards. It's a foggy morning. And you notice that's right at the top of the hill and you can look down. Well, you can imagine a foggy morning, he's on patrol, on his own, with his whistle. Suddenly he sees this large object looming up from the bottom of, towards Smithdown Place, Penny Lane, coming up through the mist. He can't quite make it out because his eyesight's not all that good. Just sees this massive object coming up. So what does he do? Being a police officer, what does he do, guys? What would you do? What was that, Ian? Blow your whistle. Blow your whistle. No, he went and hid. He went and hid. And as it came up, it was he discovered it was an elephant. So he brought the elephant and led it back up, because it seemed to be quite tame, led it back up and goes to the police station. Goes in, leaves the elephant outside, obviously, goes in and goes, "Sarge, Sarge, I found an elephant." And the Sarge goes, "Yeah, right, I wonder what you're on." "Okay then, bring it in." "But it's a big elephant, I can't bring it in." "No, go and bring it in. If you don't bring it in, you'll get fined." So, all right, Sarge. Goes and tries to bring the elephant through the door, and you're supposed to be able to see the markings on one of the doors still of where he tried to get the elephant in. The elephant had escaped from a circus on Sefton Park. How's that? That's a really... So I like that one, blowing the whistle, but unfortunately he didn't, but he brought it in. So have a look at the marks on one of the doors. I'm yet to find them, but that's the urban myth, isn't it, Robert? And if we just turn around here, guys, this is the entrance to... Okay, right. This is the entrance in here to what's now the Abbey Apartments. It used to be called Wavertree Gardens. This area was often known as the Liverpool in a miniature, because prior to this being built, this was a tram shed, but it was built for people with appalling housing conditions. And as we go up the hill, there's little places called like Hill Place, and they were some of your courts, and they were built in the 1930s to try and alleviate those. Okay, so this is it's part of that sort of 1930s development of good sort of solid housing, corporation housing, trying to get people actually out of these horrendous conditions and housing conditions that were existing within Liverpool. Okay, should we head off and cross over? Rich, do you want to? Should we go over and the milk? Yeah, I know the milk. Okay. Right, we're going to cross over now, everybody. I think it's stunning. I love that building. I'm so glad you guys.
I love that badge. County Police. What does it say? County Police.
It says yes. Yeah. That's the old Liverpool Police, Liverpool and Bootle Constabulary.
Just one thing that I think is really interesting about the police station is obviously the police force was part of the government, part of the state. It's about power and control and authority. So if you look above the middle door, you'll see that the fan light, the light above the door, has got quite a strange design. It looks like sort of bars, doesn't it? You know, like prison bars almost. Well, actually what they are is, if you look at the back of a penny, it's the portcullis that you see on the penny. It's the symbol of government.
I like the little dog. Okay, folks, can we just stop here for a wee sec? You're probably saying, why is he stopping by a yard? Why is he stopping by a yard? Well, what do you notice about it looking in? What do you notice about it? It's quite large, isn't it? You've got a wall there. The wall curves round. You've got two buildings. Anybody had any tea or coffee this morning? Yeah. Breakfast cereal? What did you have on it? Milk. This was one of the dairies. This was Harpers Dairy, or one of the Harpers family dairies. And you can have a look at some fantastic pictures. And the family basically built the sort of business around here. It's not the only dairy. Basically what happened was there's one, for instance, there was another one on Prince Alfred Road. It used to be called Cow Lane, did Prince Alfred Road, because you drive the cows along there. But that's a story which I think Richard will probably tell you about. So what happened was that as towns and cities grew up, urban areas grew up, the market for milk in rural areas just fell. So the farmers in places like West Yorkshire, Cumberland, parts of Lancashire thought, well, our cattle is used to being inside because of the bad winters that we have. It makes it ideal for bringing fresh milk. So a whole series of sort of milk and dairies grew up. They were called cow keepers. And at one stage, there was over 900 people in Liverpool employed as cow keepers. And this went on until the end of World War II, when the Milk Marketing Board basically came out. And so the last lot of cow keepers basically finished in the parts of the 1970s. But this is one of the dairies. The other Harpers Dairy, by the way, is on Rose Lane. And you can still see that purpose-built yards as areas were built up, because they used to keep them in. Great little stories on a Friday, by the way. Friday was Fresh Cow Day. So you've heard of cowboys, I presume. Well, we had our own cowboys in Liverpool, and they don't just mean builders and whatever, you know, or electronic. We had people who used to drive the cattle up from Lime Street Station on a Friday to all the fresh dairies or fresh cattle in the area. So well was the industry ran, because they had so much high standards, that when other areas like London had major problems with cow diseases, Liverpool didn't, and that's why it was so successful. But this is it. This was the old Harpers Dairy. And if you go to the Wavertree Society website, what have we got? Some fantastic pictures of it. Dave Joy, yeah. And you can actually go online and look at, and he's got a list of all the cow keepers, where they were located, all the different places, and it's fantastic to go round and work out all the buildings. If you know Smithdown Road, where Halfords is, that was another one, and that was a big Shipham, they called it. It could have over 30 to 40 cows. So anyway, guys, I think we are due to move on. Here's Richard going to grab the microphone. There we are.
Right, okay, would you like to follow me? Just to mention something that Martin mentioned very briefly before, we've got the Prince Alfred Pub, obviously, locally known to the PA as many people, but we can fairly accurately date this to when it was called the PA. The same goes with Prince Alfred Road, which is exactly opposite, and it goes back to 1866. And 1866 was the date, actually, when a local man called Samuel Graves, who had his house just where the blind school is down that road now, he was the Member of Parliament for Liverpool, and he had the honour of taking Prince Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, in as a guest for a few nights. And this was considered to be a great honour for him, and he obviously wanted to impress. The problem is that his house faced onto what is now the Mystery. And at the time, the road there wasn't called Prince Alfred Road, obviously. It was called Cow Lane, probably, as Martin said, to do with the dairy. So he basically turned around to the city council, the town council at the time, and the corporation of Wavertree, and basically said, can I rename this street in honour of our royal visitor? Can we call it Prince Alfred Road rather than Cow Lane, because it sounds a little bit nicer for the prince to stay at? And they must have agreed, and that's what happened. So it's probably around that time that the pub got its name as well. Full of characters, Wavertree, and it's great. Yeah. So here we are now outside the town hall. Has anyone been in here yet since it's reopened? Yeah. What do you think? It was nice, wasn't it? Yeah, they've done a good job. The town hall itself dates back to 1872. It was designed by a local architect called Mr. Reeve. He wasn't a big, massive, super famous architect, and this is probably the most impressive building that he built. One of the things they say about it is that it's actually a little bit old-fashioned for its time. Now, if you remember when we started down at the bottom, I talked about the Italianate style of that house that was down there with the cannons. Well, that was a style that was very popular in the 1850s and 1860s. This has also got that sort of Italianate style to it, and yet this was built in the 1870s, so it was a little bit old-fashioned at the time, but obviously that's what they built. Probably the most famous story about Wavertree Town Hall is that right up until the 1970s, it was still part of the city council buildings that were owned by the council, and it still had its functions as a council office. And so it would have been in here that anybody born in Wavertree would have registered their birth. Now, who do we think is the most famous person born in Wavertree? George Harrison. When was he born? 1943. His dad would have literally walked around the corner from Arnold Grove and registered his baptism in this very building in the council offices here. So this is where George Harrison would have been registered. It's had many iterations over the years, pubs, restaurants, bars. It's now a fantastic restaurant, recently been done up, well worth a visit if anyone gets the chance.
Okay guys, we're just going to stop just here, outside the bins for a couple of seconds. This, as the plaque will tell you, was the smallest house in England. And you can see the size. It's probably built in a little entry, but there was a family here. It's now obviously it's now owned for student accommodation. Other people live here, and it's next to the fabulous pub, the Cock and Bottle. Now they're great. They used to be when the Magical Mystery Tour was on, and it's now just started off. They're no longer stopping in the area, but they allow us to use the loos because people need the loo stop. But what we've got here is a door through there, but I won't get anyone to knock on it today. The side was on, but it was redone. There was actually a campaign to get the door back put in there, and graciously the brewery put the door back there so that we can celebrate the house. Now, guys, I think what we're going to do now is pop round, because a certain individual was introduced by Richard before. Who was that? George Harrison. So shall we go and have a look where he lived? What we're going to do is walk up just past the Bedford and turn left, but it's worth noting as we do the shop fronts on the opposite side of the high street, because they are very rare Georgian shop fronts.
So yes, here we are at the Lamb Pub. It's funny how sometimes you can look at a building and you can almost instantly tell what it was used for just by the shape of it. So it's clearly not a pub anymore, but actually it was probably one of the oldest pubs in Liverpool, because certainly one of the oldest in Wavertree. And we know this because there was already a building on this site in use as a pub before this present one was built. It was an important and imposing building, not just because it was a very important pub, and the name, the Lamb, obviously suggests the sort of rural area that it was in, but the fact that the owner of it had a bit of a byline as well. He wasn't just a pub owner, he also ran a series of coaches or horse-drawn trams, basically, that would take people from Wavertree into Liverpool. And this was the place where you'd get on and off that tram. And that's why if you look to the left-hand side of the building, you will see the huge archway there. That was the original coach and horse entrance to the stables were at the back. So if you were a merchant, or if you were a farmer, or you were just a person who needed to go into Liverpool for business, well, you could walk there back in the day, but that'd take you, what, an hour and a half maybe, if you were slow. Or if you had a little bit of money and you could afford a few pennies, you'd pay to get on the tram, and the horse-drawn tram would take you all the way into Liverpool and take you back at the end of the day. Probably the handy thing was as well is that if you were waiting for the tram or whatever, wait for it to come back, you could always get a meal or something to drink while you were waiting here as well. So the landlord, he made his money all the way through, didn't he, really? From the people sitting there, from the people waiting for the trams, for the people on the trams as well. Well, there were horse-drawn trams originally, so they could have just been run by basically anybody, you know, with a licence. Then what happened is they got electrified in the 1880s and 1890s, and right up until the 1950s, Liverpool still had an extensive tram network. And in fact, you might, if you look to your right-hand side, you'll see the roundabout with the Picton clock and the toilet in the middle. The reason why that's such a big round roundabout is that was a tram circus, they called it, which basically the trams would get to this point and then they'd loop around the roundabout and go back into Liverpool. That was as far as the trams went. Exactly the same for Smithdown Place, Penny Lane, at the other end of Church Road. That was a tram terminus. If you wanted to head out beyond this point into the suburbs towards Chilwell and Speke and that, you had to get on a bus. And eventually, as we all know, buses replaced the electric trams and there was no need for them anymore. You'll notice something odd about the Lamb. If you look to the left-hand side of it, you'll see that part of it has been rebuilt. You can clearly see where the new brickwork is. That's because when they were building the flats next door, the builders, very stupidly, undermined the foundations of this side of the pub and it fell over. The side of the pub absolutely fell in. Now, it's a grade 2 listed building, which means that legally, if you damage it, you can be actually get a criminal record for doing damage to it. So the council turned around and said, either you get a criminal record or you rebuild it exactly as it was, as close as you can. And that's why, if you look, they've copied the exact same style of brickwork, where you've got the stretchers, which are bricks laid lengthwise, and then the headers, which is the bricks laid on the short way. And when it's done in that pattern, it's known as the Flemish bond, because it was originally used over in Holland. We copied it from them. So that's a 2000s replica of the original part of the pub that fell down because the stupid builders undermined it.
They were very, very lucky. They were very lucky because the person living in that space had just literally stepped out of the room 30 seconds before it collapsed. So very, very lucky. Now, folks, just as, well, Richard was saying about the trams bringing in people from Liverpool, this area basically became a very popular area for you to come at weekends. Now, okay, Robert is smiling because he knows where we're going to next. However, I'm going to quickly just, if you want to just turn yourselves around, okay, where we've got Japper and the bow front next to it, those are Georgian shop fronts. Now, where Japper is, if you misbehaved in the Lamb or any other places, the Clock or the Barley Mow, you ended up in the dungeons down there, because we visited or saw the first, well, the last police station, correct myself, from the Lancashire Constabulary. This was the second one where Jappers are, but ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to go and see what the original place where you misbehaved if you came from Liverpool, where you went. So what we're going to do is walk straight across, careful when across Lake Road, and we'll go into the Lockup, I think. Okay, everybody. Right. I mentioned before, well, about Wavertree becoming a bit more of a party place, should we say? People from the town, the growing town of Liverpool, coming out to this area here. Guys, can we just let me just step back a wee sec, folks. So if you say in the late 1700s, coming out here to get drunk or have a party, whatever, if you misbehaved, the parish constable at the time had to put you up in his house. So if you did anything like got drunk, damaged something, misbehaved, he had to put you up in his house and claim the expenses back. So do you think his wife would have been very happy with that? How would you feel about having to put up a bunch of drunks or a bunch of criminals or something? Not very happy. So in 1796, this location was built, and Robert's going to let you in. It's where they put people who misbehaved, rather than, well, obviously the police station built later on. This was your sort of town jail. Now, the land here was on the common. This was part of Wavertree Common. Now, the trees were actually later additioned. There weren't any trees here, and the common, by the way, went all the way. If we turn around over here, see where it says Chewell Road? All those properties down to Woolton Road, there was nothing built on whatsoever, because they had a windmill at the top of that site. But please, go in. Have you got the keys there, Richard? We'll lock this lot in. So this is it. Should I mention as well? We've mentioned about James Picton before. James Picton had this place built up, renovated, put the tower on top with a weather vane because it had fallen into disrepair.
And originally it had a flat roof, and there is some illustrations of the flat roof. We do know that there was a first floor, there was a fireplace there, there was very likely to be a staircase where those holes are going up, and it was literally to hold the drunks overnight before the constable would come along and take them away. Otherwise, before then, they had to be held in the constable's house, which obviously wasn't very good. So it got built. But it didn't last that long. About 1860, it was out of use for the criminality because the other police station was built where the Indian restaurant is now. And then the great burghers of Wavertree, in their idiocy, decided, well, we don't need it, we'll knock it down. But thankfully, Lord Picton decided, no, it is a prominent site. Even then, in 1860, it was a prominent part of Wavertree. So he decided, well, we'll go the other way and we'll put a pointed roof on it. And so the roof that's on now, which is very prominent with a wonderful weather vane. So when you go out, have a look at the weather vane, it's great. They put that on, and it was there as a prominent part. And the only other one is the one at Everton, that's on the club badge at Everton, but that's rounded and this is hexagonal. It was used at one stage for cholera victims, which came about 1840s, 1850s, and literally for overnight they were put in before they were taken away or pronounced dead, died of things. We did think a couple of months ago we could hire this out to the government for the COVID thing, so they had a few bob for Wavertree, but there you go. And then it was also used, we do have details very rarely, but it was used for when the Irish immigrants came over from 1847, 48, and they were absolutely destitute. They literally had nowhere to stay overnight, so they were put in here, and I don't think it was very often, but they were put in overnight and then made their own way after that. So it was in use. So it is an important building. Come in, watch the step. It is an important building. It is part of our heritage. It's part of Wavertree. People have driven past it hundreds of. If I had a penny for every time somebody said, "I've driven past it, I've never seen it," I'd be a very, very wealthy person. It's important. Its heritage is a bit like the TARDIS. You don't think it's that big, etc. And we're very proud of it. We want to keep it. It is prominent, and it links. I've always think. This is 1796. You've got the Abbey over the road, which is in its own way of its type in the 1930s, and I like that idea that there's that building, this building, and it's still part of our heritage. And what the Wavertree Society is about the built environment, about the history of Wavertree, linking in with Love Wavertree and everything else that's going on with Richard and Martin, and it's great that we can do that.
Can you imagine being locked up in there? Could you imagine like your mates trying to, without the roof, trying to get you out? I think that's why Picton put it on, but... Sorry, what was your name? Darren. Darren just pointed out, it's called Lake Road. It's always great, every time you go to a place, try to suss out, particularly if it's an old area like Wavertree, why a place got its name. Lake Road. Until the 1920s, this was a little lake where, for instance, you could sort of paddle, put your little boats in, sail your boats, and there's some great pictures on the Wavertree Society's website and stuff of young people doing that. But people got concerned about health and safety and drowning and whatever, so it got culverted, and we've now got the swing park. But if you just look up the hill over here, notice there's another sandstone building. Go on back and explore that, because that's it's the old Monk's Well. And Monk's Well has a myth about sort of a little monastery being connected by a tunnel from there over to Chilwell Church. But it's called the Monk's Well because there was a well there, and when other wells dried up, this didn't. Now there's two streams which come out of here. One goes off via the Brook House. Does anyone know the Brook House? Right, through Greenbank into Sefton Park, and the other one goes a bit further up. That's Lower Brook, Upper Brook, Ullet Road, again feeding into Sefton Park, into the Boat Lake, out via Aigburth, and then into the River Mersey. It's called the River Jordan when it gets out there. And anyone heard of Jericho Lane? The reason you've got those names is that was area settled by Puritan settlers. So the water comes off here. You notice how what we've got here is a dip. So from the hill here, climbing up. So what we have is a natural aquifer, so like a water collector, and that's why you've got the lake. That's one of the reasons this area is quite prone to flooding. So the water goes into the River Mersey. I'll tell you a little funny story. A few years ago, I was doing a coach tour for some from some people from London, from a Pentecostal church. And when I said we were going down Jericho Lane, oh, that's great. Oh, yes. Oh, that's lovely. I said, we're going to the Holy Land in a couple of weeks. So when I said yes, and the stream going out is called the River Jordan, they went, stop the coach. I went, why? We want to get off so we can get baptised. So I had to tell him it was culverted. So it's filled in, but it's still there, it still goes out. So like Liverpool is built, the Liver Pool was a tidal creek off the River Mersey. The Otters Pool was the Osters Brook and the River Jordan, that's another tidal creek off the River Mersey. So go and explore that as well. So guys, I think we're going to be stopping quite soon. So our final stop is we're going to be looking just up the road at the Picton clock. So if you'd like to come with me. There are places I remember. Go on to the next line. There are places I remember. Some have gone and remain. That's one of these places here. And why I've stopped you here is two things. It's one of those places which I remember all my life and will remember all my life. And that's the aspect on the Picton clock. Because the reason we got the Picton clock was that James Picton, who I mentioned before, he was a resident here in Sandy Knowe. Go and explore Sandy Knowe. It's a house and action area up the hill. But he built this in memory of his wife, Sarah Pooley. And he built it here so that people here could tell the time. There's a great tradition that people would say, because they didn't have a watch, that, oh, go and see what time Sarah Pooley's got. Now, the reason for building it here is you've got the route through the village. You also went to Old Swan. Lake Road goes to Old Swan. What was Mospits Lane is now Chilwell Road, going to Chilwell, and Church Road, which would lead you down to Woolton and Gattaca. So it's right at the crossroads so people could see it. And he wanted people to benefit from being able to tell the proper time, which is why they built the clock there in memory of his wife. Now, the interesting part of when I'm doing a Beatles tour, is I will always point out the Abbey Cinema, because the Abbey Cinema, and I use that first refrain from In My Life, because in the first draft he talks about coming up Church Road from Penny Lane up to the clock tower, and in the circle at the Abbey, spending many a happy hour. It was one of the places he identified, and basically John altered that song because it didn't quite fit, and that's why we get Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, because Paul said, well, why don't we still use that concept in some of our later music? So that's why you get that double A side, because he talks about in that first draft past the Dutch, past St Columba, and I heard somebody mention before the overhead railway. All those are mentioned within the first draft as his Calderstones. So we've got the memory for Pooley, Sarah Pooley, via Picton. We've got John thinking about his mother because she was a cinema usherette. And when he was reconciled with his mum, because he was separated, he used to go there and spend time with his mum. Even after she passed away, he would still go and sit in that seat. And if we look straight across, we've got the coffee house, where the certain person, his mum, worked for a while, but also the White House with Jenkins, the funeral place. And like a lot of other people, we had that funeral cortege before. That was from Jenkins. I thought that was wonderful. But Cilla Black, if people remember Cilla Black, that's where she left on her final journey from that funeral place. Ringo Starr, his parents, they also handled his parents. And that's why I like to sort of stop here. It was also where they did my mum and dad over the last couple of years. But this is a special place. It's the places I remember. And guys, I think what we're going to do is stop here. And folks, I want you to take this away, that you guys, Wavertree is a special place. It's a place, it's been like a city in miniature, but it's a place of memories. It's a special place. So guys, I like that you take that away with lots of photos, and I can't wait to see them all so that we can put them up for our Heritage Open. So I hope you've enjoyed this morning. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you've got any questions, ask Rob. But seriously, you can give me an email, or I'm on the Love Wavertree WhatsApp group, so give us a shout. And if you ever want a little tour yourselves, I know Richard's happy to do it, I'm happy to do it. We're happy to either do it together or separately as well. So guys, thank you all very much, and I can't wait to see your photos.
Thank you. You know that Lidl have bought the site, and we're trying to keep.